3, we're going to talk about the anatomy of the vulva. If you don't know what a vulva is, this module is for you. We're going to talk about what is the vulva, what is the vagina or the front hole, what is the clitoris, what is the uterus, and how menstruation happens. As you go on this journey of exploring your various parts of your body, figuring out where you experience the most pleasure, I want to dig into talking about the parts of our genitals. Because while we may have studied genitals in our biology class, we really shy away from talking about these parts more than any other part of our body. And really, it's just another part. So we should unpack and explore what goes on down there when we say down there, and how that might look different for different people. And I'm going to start with anatomy for people with vulvas. Now I'm using the word vulva and vagina and penis and very normative terminology that you'll find in the medical community, for example. But what words you choose to call your genitals might be totally different, and I encourage you and welcome you to use those words and take my representations and language with a grain of salt. And so here's a model I've made of the vulva. Most vulvas do not look exactly like this. Some people say every vulva is unique because vulvas tend to come in lots of different shapes, colors, sizes. What you're looking at here is one that's brown, but as you can see, there's no hair around this vulva. Most vulvas have hair, and most vulvas have labia of various shapes and sizes. And so let's jump into describing what it is when I say vulva. Vulva is the stuff you're seeing externally. A lot of people use the word vagina to describe this part, but medically speaking, vagina is actually the vaginal canal, or this vaginal opening right here. This is the part we call the vagina, but the visible part on the outside is what we call the vulva. And this visible part on the outside has a few different components to keep in mind. The first is the most obvious one, which is out here. These lips are what are called the labia. Labia is a word that literally comes from lips. I don't know if these look like lips, but I'll let you decide for yourself. And as you look under these lips, there is, right up here, you might be able to see a pink color little thing peeking out. That is the clitoris. Now, we'll talk more about the clitoris in just 1 second. Under the clitoris, there's one little hole in here. This hole is the urethra. The urethra or the urethral opening. The urethra is where someone pees from. And under that hole is another opening or a front hole, which one could call the vagina, the front hole, the place where people might menstruate from, where they might give birth from, where they might insert things to experience pleasure. And another hole not pictured here is the anus, which is another hole where someone might insert things for pleasure or poop from, to be completely frank. And so these are the various holes in the body, and it's important to remember that these are 3 separate holes. So if someone says that they're peeing from their vagina, it's a little bit of a misnomer. They're actually peeing from their urethra, and everything else is going on from the vagina. What's fun is, if I turn this model for you, you'll get a sense of all that's going on behind the scenes. Behind the scenes, you can see you have 2 canals here. Let me pull that apart. You have a vaginal opening which is much bigger than the urethral opening, and the urethra goes ahead and is a long tube that connects with your urinary bladder and your entire excretory system. The vaginal canal connects with the uterus, and we look at what that looks like in just 1 second. What's this? This is the clitoris. So remember when I said that there's just this pink little thing peeking out? How this looks really varies a lot from person to person. Some people have a very visible clitoris, which could be pretty large, especially if you've been on hormone replacement therapy. You might have a clitoris that is of various sizes. And the real action is also what's happening inside. So whether or not you can see the clitoris outside, the clitoris is much larger, and this was actually something that people didn't really talk about or know about till very recently. it was almost left out of the whole pleasure conversation. People would be like, oh, stimulate the clit, and think that this is the only point that you need to stimulate, when in reality, you actually can stimulate your clitoris indirectly by stimulating anything around the whole vulva. Or even when you're experiencing vaginal pleasure or pleasure through your front hole, you're actually indirectly stimulating the clitoris. So now I'm going to remove the vulva layer and just look at the clitoris. As you can see, the clitoris wraps around the vaginal canal. And what's really fun about this is when someone inserts something inside the vaginal opening, they are actually indirectly stimulating the clitoris. So if you've ever heard of the G-spot, everyone's on this big mission to find the G-spot. There's all sorts of Cosmo articles and whatnot written about it. But in reality, the G-spot, and actually Cosmo has come out and apologized for this, is just indirectly stimulating the clitoris. So people say when you insert fingers into the vaginal opening, and if you do this motion, you might reach the G-spot, and that actually is just you're reaching upwards and stimulating the clitoris indirectly. And so as we're thinking about how this vulva connects to, remember that the clitoris is only one little bit that you're looking at from the outside, but there's so much more going on inside. And as you're looking at the vaginal canal, it connects to a much larger part of your body, which you might have heard of, our friend the uterus. As we think about the vulva, let's look at one more model. This one's fun because it's molded from an actual vulva. I'm not sure how much we can see here because it's not an educational tool in the same way. But here you can see much bigger labia which are much closer together. And in case you can see hints of hot pink, that's again the clitoris. And I want you to remember what's where, because now we're going to take a peek into what's going on inside. So if this is the vulva and this is what it looks like outside, and there's a clitoris wrapped around the vaginal canal, on the inside, it all leads up to the uterus. Now, the uterus is what we study the most when we think about reproductive anatomy. So I'm going to go into this just a little bit, and I encourage you to explore this on your own if you're a big nerd about the medical stuff. But this is the vaginal canal, and it leads directly into what you call the uterus. Now I'll quickly tell you what our different characters are in this story. So you have the uterus leading into these little hand-like, finger-like structures which lead into, as if they're almost holding on to, the ovaries. Now the ovaries are the place where you have the sex cell. In totally medical, biological terms, it's what they call the quote-unquote female sex cell, the egg cell. And now the egg cell is what is released on a monthly basis. When an egg cell is released, it travels down these fallopian tubes, it travels down these finger-like structures, down these arms into the uterus, and it hangs out there and it waits. Is there a sperm cell, which is the, in quotes again, male cell, that's going to come and fertilize this egg and turn it into a fetus, eventually into a baby, right? It hangs out there, it waits there, and if there's no sperm that comes by, then it basically disintegrates, and all this thick red stuff you see around the uterine wall sheds out through the vaginal opening. And what I'm describing right now might sound familiar to you, especially if you have a uterus. That is menstruation. Now, obviously, all of this doesn't happen overnight. It's not happening in one go. It's something that happens through the month, give or take. I use the word month, but actually the length of the cycle can really vary from person to person, but typically can be around 28 days or so, where the first day is counted as the day that menstruation begins. Now, what does that mean when menstruation begins, or actually let's start with when the egg is released. the uterus spends the entire month prepping for this sperm cell to come around. So it thickens the uterine lining and it creates deposits, almost like it's preparing for this big event when the sperm is going to visit. But when the sperm doesn't visit, the uterus is like, no, I'm done. I'm going to throw all this out. And so it throws out all of this. It sheds out in the form of blood. And in order to shed out, the uterus has to do a lot of contracting, a lot of squeezing, and so you might also experience things like menstrual cramps, and there's all sorts of hormones around this entire region in your body which is causing that squeezing motion. So you might experience pain in other parts as well. You might experience a little bit of, like, some people experience diarrhea or different types of bowel movements because of those hormones. And so that's just around menstruation itself. And then there's a window around which, after, let's say, give or take 14 days from when that happens, when the egg is likely to be released. Now, when the egg is released, that's usually considered the most fertile time. So if someone's trying to get pregnant, then they should have sex around then. If they're trying to not get pregnant, they should avoid having sex around then. And once the egg is released, if someone does get pregnant, then the egg will implant in the uterine wall and grow a fetus inside this cavity here, which is the uterus. The thing to remember is that the uterus doesn't stay, it's actually in real life quite similar to this size, but it doesn't stay that small. It is very flexible and it grows quite large. And so even as you're looking at the model of the vagina, you might be thinking, wow, like the vagina looks really small. But in reality, the vagina is also super elastic to make space for a fetus that might come out in the form of a baby. And when someone stimulates their vagina, they're actually only stimulating this part. The vaginal canal actually has an end, which is the cervix right here. And so nothing that you insert into your vagina, whether that's a vibrator, a toy, a penis, fingers, a menstrual cup, nothing will go further than the cervix. It's almost like a stop, it's a wall, it's like no further entry. There might be times when things go further than the cervix, which is usually fluids can go up there, or if your doctor's inserting an IUD or something, but let's get to that conversation in a little bit.